The alarms were screaming before I even opened my eyes. My ship was falling apart around me, metal groaning like a dying animal, sparks raining down from a cracked panel above my head. I was Daniel Cole, a pilot for the Earth Defense Fleet, and in exactly 40 seconds my fighter was going to hit the upper atmosphere of a planet I had never heard of, at a speed that would turn me into a smear of ash. I pulled the ejection handle. Nothing happened. I pulled it again, my hands shaking, my heart slamming against my ribs so hard I could hear it over the alarms. The seat finally kicked me out just as the cockpit folded like paper, and I was thrown into open space, spinning, gasping, watching my ship become a fireball behind me. That should have been the end of it. A quiet death in the cold dark, another name added to a long list of pilots who never came home. Instead, something caught me. A tractor beam, pale blue and impossibly gentle, wrapped around my falling body and pulled me toward a ship the size of a small city. I remember thinking, in that strange calm way your mind works when it has already accepted death, that at least I would not die alone. I woke up in a cell made of some smooth, warm material that did not feel like metal or stone. My flight suit was gone, replaced with a plain gray garment. My body ached everywhere, but I was alive, and that alone felt like a miracle. Through the transparent wall of my cell, I could see other cells, other prisoners, all of them human, all of them just as confused as I was. We had been at war with the Thren Dominion for 3 years by then. Nobody on Earth had ever seen one in person. We only knew them through the wreckage of our ships and the reports of soldiers who barely made it back. They were said to be cold, unfeeling, ancient beyond anything we could imagine, ruling 40 systems with the kind of order that comes from centuries of controlling every emotion down to the smallest twitch. I found out that reputation was mostly true within my first hour of being awake. A guard came for me, tall and gray-scaled, moving with the calm of someone who had never once needed to hurry in their entire long life. They did not speak to me. They simply pointed, and I understood that not moving was not an option. I was taken to a room with a single chair and a single figure standing across from me, wrapped in robes so dark they looked like they were drinking the light out of the air. She did not introduce herself right away. She studied me the way you would study a specimen under glass, and when she finally spoke, her voice was flat, careful, and precise. Her name was Vesserine, and she ruled the Thren Dominion. I did not know that yet. I only knew that she asked me questions about my fleet, my commanders, my planet, and I told her nothing, because even scared out of my mind, some stubborn part of me refused to hand over anything that could get more of my people killed. She did not threaten me. She did not raise her voice. She simply said that stubbornness was inefficient and left the room. I sat there for hours, unsure if I had just saved my life or ended it. The war ended 2 months later, not with a final battle, but with an agreement that nobody expected. Both sides had lost too much. Too many ships, too many soldiers, too many families waiting for people who would never come home. The Thren Dominion and the Earth Defense Fleet signed a treaty, and as part of that treaty, a handful of human prisoners were kept as guarantees of peace, symbols meant to prove that both sides would honor the agreement. I was one of them, and somehow, through a twist of fate I never fully understood, I ended up standing in front of Vesserine's daughter. Her name was Aelthara, and she was nothing like what I expected a member of an ancient, emotionless empire to be. She had the same gray scales as her mother, the same sharp eyes, but there was something alive in the way she looked at me, something curious instead of calculating. She asked me questions too, but her questions were different. She wanted to know what human laughter sounded like. She wanted to know why humans cried at things that were not sad. She wanted to know why I still had hope, even as a prisoner, even after losing everything. I did not have good answers for her. I just told her the truth. I told her that hope was not something you chose because it made sense. It was something that stayed with you whether you wanted it or not, and the only real choice you had was whether to listen to it. She thought about that for a long time before she spoke again. Weeks turned into months, and something strange happened. I was still technically a prisoner, but I was no longer treated like one. Aelthara came to see me often, and slowly, carefully, we built something neither of us had a name for. She taught me her language, and I taught her how to laugh at something just because it was funny, not because it served a purpose. She told me about her people's long history of controlling every feeling until feelings themselves became a kind of forgotten language. I told her about my mother's cooking, about summer evenings on Earth, about the sound of rain on a window. I fell for her slowly, the way you fall asleep without noticing the exact moment it happens. And somehow, impossibly, she fell for me too. When Vesserine found out, the room went cold in a way that had nothing to do with temperature. She called it reckless. She called it dangerous. She said that a bond between her daughter and a human prisoner could unravel the fragile peace both sides had bled for. I stood there and listened, because I understood her fear even if I did not agree with it. But Aelthara did something I never expected. She stood in front of her mother, in front of the entire royal council, and said that this bond was not a threat to peace. It was proof that peace was possible. She said that if two people from opposite ends of the galaxy could learn to trust each other, then maybe the war that had already ended on paper could finally end in truth. The council argued for weeks. Some called for my execution, calling me a symbol of weakness that could not be allowed near the throne. Others, quieter, more thoughtful, saw what Aelthara saw. In the end, it was Vesserine who made the final decision, not because she believed in my worth, but because she believed in her daughter's judgment, even when it terrified her. The wedding was set for the following season, and word of it spread through both empires like wildfire. Not everyone was happy. There were protests on Earth from people who still grieved the war. There were protests among the Thren from those who saw the marriage as a betrayal of tradition. Security around the ceremony was tighter than anything I had ever seen, because threats had already started arriving from both sides. On the morning of the wedding, I stood in a hall built from pale stone, surrounded by thousands of Thren nobles, and a small group of human representatives who had traveled across the stars to witness the moment. Aelthara walked toward me in robes the color of deep starlight, and for a moment, the fear in the room seemed to disappear. Then the first shot rang out. It came from somewhere in the upper balconies, a weapon smuggled in by someone who believed that stopping this marriage was worth breaking every law of the ceremony. The bolt of energy tore through the air, aimed not at me, but at Aelthara. I do not remember deciding to move. My body simply reacted, throwing itself between her and the shot, and I felt the burning heat graze my shoulder as I fell. Chaos exploded through the hall. Guards moved instantly, more disciplined than I had ever seen humans move under fire, catching the shooter within seconds. Aelthara was on the ground beside me, her hands pressed against my wound, shouting for help in a voice that had completely lost its careful composure. Vesserine was there too, closer than I expected, her face unreadable, but her hands trembling as she ordered the medical team forward. I survived. The wound was serious but not fatal, and within a week, I was standing again, my arm in a sling, ready to finish what had been interrupted. The council wanted to postpone the wedding. Aelthara refused. She said that if we stopped now out of fear, then whoever fired that shot would have already won. So we finished the ceremony 3 days later, quieter this time, with tighter security and fewer guests, but with the same fierce determination in Aelthara's eyes. When the officiant asked if anyone present objected, the room was silent, not because everyone agreed, but because everyone understood that this marriage had already survived worse than words. Vesserine stood at the front of the hall, watching her daughter marry a human she had once considered a threat to everything she had built. Her smile that day was thin, careful, and calculated, the kind of smile that comes from years of hiding what you truly feel behind an expression that serves a purpose. I did not blame her. I understood, even then, that trust takes longer to build than fear takes to create. Life after the wedding was not easy. There were more threats, more attempts to break the fragile peace that our marriage represented. 6 months in, a group of Thren extremists tried to sabotage a diplomatic ship carrying human officials, and only quick thinking from Aelthara's personal guard stopped it from becoming a disaster. A year later, a rogue Earth militia attempted to assassinate a Thren ambassador, blaming him for crimes committed long before he was even born. Each time, Aelthara and I found ourselves standing in the middle, trying to hold together something that felt like it could shatter at any moment. But slowly, the attempts grew fewer. Slowly, the anger on both sides began to cool, replaced by something that looked a lot like tired acceptance, and eventually, something that looked a lot like hope. Vesserine visited us twice a year during this time, always on a strict schedule, always with an itinerary planned down to the minute. She called me nothing more than the human consort for the first 2 years, not out of cruelty, but because she genuinely did not know what else to call me. I spent those visits trying to understand her, the same way I had once tried to understand her daughter, and slowly, I began to see the fear behind her control. She was not cold because she did not feel. She was cold because feeling, for her people, had always come at a terrible cost. When Aelthara became pregnant, the entire Dominion held its breath. Nobody knew what a child born of 2 such different species would even look like, or if the pregnancy itself would be safe. I spent those months terrified in a way I had never been terrified in battle, because this was a fear I could not fight my way out of. All I could do was wait, and hope, and hold Aelthara's hand through nights when neither of us could sleep. Our daughter was born during a violent storm that knocked out half the power in the capital, and for a few terrifying minutes, The medical team worked in emergency lighting while I stood outside the birthing chamber, unable to do anything but pray to whatever was listening. When I finally heard her cry, high and furious and completely, wonderfully human in its intensity, I broke down and cried harder than I had cried in my entire life. We named her Nora, after my grandmother, and she came into the world with gray-scaled skin like her mother, but with my exact eyes, a strange and beautiful mix of two worlds that should have never been able to combine. Vesserine was not present for that birth. A crisis on a distant border demanded her attention, and though she sent her regrets, I could tell from the way Aelthara went quiet that it hurt more than either of them wanted to admit. I spent the next few years watching my daughter grow, watching her laugh with the same reckless joy I had once tried to teach her mother, and watching Vesserine study her from a careful distance during each visit, like a scientist afraid to disturb an experiment she did not fully understand. Then, 3 years after Nora's birth, disaster struck in a way none of us saw coming. A splinter group within the Dominion, furious over decades of what they saw as weakness in the royal family, launched a coordinated attack meant to remove Vesserine from power entirely, and to eliminate anyone connected to what they called the human corruption of the bloodline. That included me, that included Nora, that included Aelthara. I remember the night it happened with a clarity that still makes my chest tight. Alarms tore through the palace at an hour when everyone should have been asleep. I grabbed Nora out of her bed before I even understood what was happening, her small body shaking against my chest as explosions rattled the walls somewhere in the distance. Aelthara was already moving, weapon in hand, shouting directions to the guards who had rushed to protect us. We ran through corridors I had never used before, hidden passages built centuries ago for exactly this kind of emergency, while behind us, the sound of fighting grew louder and closer. I held Nora so tightly I was afraid I would hurt her, whispering to her that everything would be fine, even though I had no idea if that was true. We found Vesserine in a fortified chamber deep beneath the palace, already coordinating a counterattack with a calm that seemed impossible given the chaos outside. When she saw Nora in my arms, something flickered across her face, something I had never seen there before. Fear, real and unguarded, not for herself, but for a grandchild she had barely let herself get close to. The fighting lasted through the night. I will not pretend it was easy, or that everyone made it out unharmed. Good guards died protecting people they had sworn to protect, and the weight of that loss stayed with all of us long after the attack was finally crushed by dawn. But we survived. Vesserine survived. Aelthara survived. And Nora, impossibly, slept through most of it in my arms, too young to understand how close we had all come to losing everything. In the days after the attack, something between Vesserine and me shifted permanently. She thanked me, quietly, for protecting her granddaughter, and though the words were simple, I understood the weight behind them. For the first time, she did not call me the human consort. She used my name, mispronounced slightly, but my name nonetheless. 2 years later, our son was born. A difficult birth that left Aelthara exhausted but glowing with relief once it was finally over. We named him Eli, and he came out furious and loud, with his mother's stubborn brow in my own ears, screaming for 11 straight minutes in a way that alarmed the medical staff until I explained that human babies simply do that sometimes. This time, Vesserine was present. She stood at the edge of the chamber in her full formal robes, silent and unreadable as always, until Aelthara, exhausted and laughing and crying all at once, asked her mother to hold her grandson. I watched Vesserine take Eli into arms that had once held treaties and scepters and the compressed grief of countless soldiers without so much as a tremor. And then I watched those same arms begin to shake. The color drained out of her scales and returned wrong, a shade I had never seen on her before, something between gray and gold that her people had never needed a word for because no one had ever required it. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. Eli, tiny and furious the way all newborns are, wrapped one small hand around her clawed finger and held on tight. And then, for the first time in 900 years, Queen Vesserine of the Thren Dominion cried. Her tears ran silver down the fine gray ridges of her face, slow at first, like her body had forgotten how to do something it had spent 10,000 years unlearning. Nobody in that room said a word. Aelthara reached over and took my hand, and I realized I was crying too. The easy human kind of tears that come without needing an entire civilization to unlearn its own fear first. He is very small, Vesserine finally said, her voice cracking slightly at the edges in a way I had never heard before. I had forgotten how small they start. You held Nora too, I said gently, when she was born. I did not hold her like this, Vesserine answered, still not looking away from Eli. I held her like a queen holds a diplomatic outcome. I did not know I was permitted to hold her like this. Nobody permits it, Aelthara said softly. You simply do it. Vesserine held her grandson for several more minutes before finally, carefully, passing him back, her hands lingering just a little longer than necessary. She has not called me the human consort since that day. Something in her changed permanently in that room. Some old wall finally worn down by two small children who did not know or care about ancient rules of composure. Years have passed since then. Nora is older now, curious and fearless, the kind of child who asks questions simply because she wants to know the answer, not because it serves any purpose. Eli is younger, still stubborn, still furious about most things in the wonderful way small children are. Vesserine visits often now, without a fixed schedule, and I have watched her sit on the floor of our home, letting her grandchildren braid ribbons through the sacred crest spines on her head, something no Thren had done to a reigning queen in recorded history. The Thren still do not have a proper word for what she felt in that birthing chamber the day Eli was born. Aelthara and I simply call it grandmother, and when Vesserine once overheard us using that word, she considered it carefully, the way her people consider every unfamiliar idea, checking it from every angle, before finally deciding, quietly, that it would do. She smiled at my wedding because careful calculation told her it was the right thing to do in that moment. She cried holding her grandchildren because, for the first time in 900 years, nothing needed to be calculated at all.